Hello and welcome to the Writing for Academic Publication webinar series hosted by the Graduate Writing Center at Teachers College, Columbia University. My name is Catherine Cheng-Stahl and I will be facilitating this webinar. So in this particular video, the focus will be on finding a home for your writing. One of the things to think about as you are finding a home to house your writing is to consider whether you have certain writing projects that you're working on that might work well for publication. So some areas to consider would be, are you working on certain work for your courses that could be recycled or upcycled for publication? What about your own research projects, whether they are related to your own degree or perhaps research related to work with an advisor or a research team, perhaps? You can think about work that's part of your degree requirements. So for example, for some programs, there's a requirement to write a literature review. Perhaps that's something that can also become a larger writing project for publication. You can consider your teaching experiences if you are a practitioner. There are journals that are geared towards a practitioner audience. So anecdotes that you have in your field, experiences in classrooms, all of that could be inspiration for a piece of publication. Another area to consider would be conference proposals as well as presentations that you've been working on. If there's not something that you're working on, you can also consider writing from scratch with the purpose of publishing. And this is important because writing for publication is a very specific genre of writing with its own conventions. So course papers are often repurposed for publication, and one of the things that came up in conversation with the GWC team is that book chapters can be a wonderful option for repurposing some of your course ideas. Book chapters are a great place for publication as well because they tend to be more open-ended, inviting experimentation and innovation, more creativity in the form and style of your writing. So there's just a lot more flexibility with this particular format. So while journals are a great place to house your writing, don't forget about book chapters. So not all course papers are equally suited for publication. So pieces like memos, reflections, or response papers to particular assignments are less suited for publication. But work that is empirical, so if you are designing your own original research study and you are doing data collection, data analysis, findings from that study would be well suited for publication. Conceptual pieces are also welcome for publication. So if you are working out some kind of theoretical or conceptual framework, you have commentaries, even original essays can be repurposed for publication. As was mentioned before, book reviews are also a wonderful publication source. Sometimes book reviews are written for classes. So if that is an option for a course that you're taking, definitely consider that for publication. If a book review is something that you intend on publishing, you do want to think about reviewing a book that has been published fairly recently because relevance and timeliness are both really critical to book reviews. Literature reviews are another great source for publication. And I would like to also add innovations relating to methods of data collection as well as data analysis could be a great candidate for publication. So going back to book reviews, this webinar is going to be focused on journals, but I wanted to also just remind you that book reviews are a great starting place. because again, of the openness and the flexibility involved. And often there are calls for proposals that might be organized by a faculty member, and that could be a great kind of niche community for you to get your first publication out. Something that Dr. Felicia Menza mentions in her book that I think is an important part of finding your home is to understand the field or understanding the landscape of your area of study. So there's an exercise from her book that I thought would be really relevant for this journey of finding a home. And so I have included it in this webinar, and I encourage you to pause this webinar and to explore this exercise on your own time. The idea is to get to know your field by reviewing and becoming familiar with current research. And Dr. Menza recommends doing this by finding journals within your field and picking maybe 3, going through the table of contents for these recently published studies, make a note of what types of topics are emerging, pinpointing the articles that seem to connect best to your research interests, diving into those articles and sort of synthesizing the trends and the questions that are surfacing in a particular area of study. And based on what you pick up on, start identifying the gaps in the scholarship, because these gaps might be areas where your research can begin to kind of interact and fill. So that was sort of setting the stage. Let's go into the heart of this webinar, which is talking about different strategies for finding a home. So there are a variety of ways to find a good fit for your writing, and I'm going to be talking about 6 of these ways. One way is systematically, another is by professional affiliation, third is through publishers directly, fourth, by recommendation from a peer or colleague or professor, anecdotally, and finally, using the reference section of the text that you engage with on a regular basis. So those are the main ways that I will be going through in great detail, but I also wanted to have Dr. John Wargo join this conversation because he takes on a different angle, a different perspective with regards to finding a home. Dr. Wargo thinks about home as finding an area where you would like to contribute, thinking of this area as a scholarly conversation that you're hoping to join and to advance. So thinking of your home as sort of a conversation, a dialogue, a moving talk, if you will. He also recommends pitching your project in the form of an email or perhaps in person or virtually through a conference. And this could be a way to see how others respond to your ideas. This can be directly to editors of a journal that you're interested in. It can also just be with colleagues that you trust or scholars whose work you admire. So the idea here is to reach out to people even before you go through a more formal manuscript submission process. I do want to note that Dr. Wargo is a pretty experienced and prolific writer. And so you might not feel as comfortable to pitch your ideas, but I did want to bring this up because it adds another perspective to how to navigate kind of the academic field when it comes to publication. But let's go back to the original list of 6 varieties of finding a home. So I'm going to begin with how to go through finding a home more systematically. And this is going to be geared towards journals. I'm going to be introducing you to a resource or a database called Scimago. I hope I am saying that correctly. It's a free resource that allows you to see how journals are ranked for your area of study, for your discipline, for your subject, etc. There are other paid subscriptions to services that do something similar that offer analytics of journal metrics. One is called Cabels, but because that involves a subscription, I will not be going over that. So let me walk you through the Scimago site. So when you go to the homepage of Scimago, this is what you will see, and you can navigate to the journal ranks domain of this site. When you get there, you will see sort of these drop-down lists, and that's where you can filter and search for the area that you belong to. So for example, I'm going to search for, let's see, social sciences. And within social sciences, let's say I am going to look at education. You can further filter by country or region. So you can focus on, journals that are based in the US, but they're also international journals. So I'm just going to keep this open to allow for more outputs. You can also search for, again, type. So I'm going to be focusing on journals. And of course, you can also filter for year. But I think this is pretty good. There are a couple of options here for you to check that I'll go through a little bit more. So as you can see, with the filters applied here, I have a list of over 1,000 journals. So if you just quickly scroll through, you'll notice a couple of things. The title of the journal is listed first, and this is organized by ranking, which is done using these quartile scores, if you will. So green is Q1, that means first quartile. What that basically means is that this journal is part of the top 25% of journals that's cited for a particular subject area or a subject category. So ideally, of course, you'll want to publish in the best journal. So you want to aim for Q1, but these can be pretty difficult and competitive to get published in, especially if you're starting off. So if you're new to publishing, you might want to try starting with maybe Q2 or even Q3. So the further you scroll, the closer you will get to the Q2s, Q3s, etc. There are other metrics that you can see here, and I want to draw your attention to the flags at the end. So this will tell you where this journal is based in. So you can see a lot of US-based and UK-based journals. There's also Germany, I just saw. All right, so that's one thing. So let's say that we're gonna click into one of these, review of educational research. So you can kind of peruse that, and if there's a journal that you want to look into, you simply click on it, and there's a breakdown of more information. So some things you notice, you can find the publisher information here. There is the coverage in terms of how long this journal has been in service, if you will. There's the H index, which I'll talk about in a moment. Then there's a section called scope, which basically unpacks the audience for this journal as well as the coverage. And this is a good thing to look into in order to find alignment with your own work. And if you scroll down further, you will see a visual of the quartiles. So this journal has consistently been in the first quartile, or the top 25% of journals in its area. If you scroll down further, this is also super helpful. You can find similar journals to the one that you're looking at. So there's a percentage score that gives you a sense of how similar the journal is with the one that you are looking at. And here are some additional charts that I haven't looked into too much. So that just gives you a sense of the site and how to navigate it as a way to find your home more systematically. So this is another journal, and I just want to draw your attention to the H index. So the H index is a metric that is usually used to measure a scholar's cumulative productivity. So that means you can think of it as how many publications or what is the output, that's the productivity. So it measures the cumulative productivity as well as the citation impact of the publication. So what that means is how many citations or what is the performance of the publications. So often H index is actually associated with people or authors, and it gives a sense of the author's academic footprint over time. On the Scimago site, there is an H index used for journals. So you can think of the number as the journal's academic footprint over time. And so the higher the number, the greater the footprint. And generally, that's a metric to show that it's a really promising, a very successful journal. Of course, these numbers are subjective and not everyone agrees with kind of the algorithm used to calculate the H index, but it's just another metric that can be useful as you inform yourself about whether a journal is one that is appropriate for you. This is a visual that I showed you earlier. For this particular journal, you can see how the colors vary. So in more recent years, the journal was ranked in the top quartile, but in previous years, it was in the second quartile, and in 2011, it was in the third quartile. So you can see how the ranking shifts over time as well. Okay, so now let's talk about finding a home by professional affiliation. The way to think about professional affiliation is to think about what are the primary journals from the professional organizations that you belong to. What are the primary kind of homes based on your field? So I'll give you some examples here. Many of us might belong to AERA, which is the American Educational Research Association. So AERA is the professional organization, and this organization publishes a couple of flagship journals. For example, AERA Open, which is open access, American Educational Research Journal. There's also the Educational Researcher, Review of Educational Research. Right? So these are all kind of the journals that are part of this professional organization. So that's another way you can find homes, is to think about what organizations you're part of and what are the things that they publish. Another common organization is the Literacy Research Association, or LRA, and their flagship journal is called the Journal of Literacy Research. So what happens is a lot of scholars who go to the LRA annual conference might be submitting conference proposals that they then work on and rework to try to get it published in this Journal of Literacy Research. I'm going to give you a third example. If you're part of, let's say, the National Council of Teachers of English, or NCTE, that is yet another professional organization. And this particular group publishes research in the teaching of English. So again, this is yet another way to find a home that is niche for your particular work. Yet another way to find a good fit would be to go directly to the publishers of the journals. So here are some common publishers. There's Wiley, there's Routledge, Sage, Taylor and Francis, just to give you a sampling. So I'm gonna, at this point, walk you through specifically what you can do with information from the publishers directly. Let's say that I am on the Taylor and Francis online site. I am logged in, so of course you'll need to create an account, but then you can make use of some of the services available to you with the free account. So I'm going to go to account settings and just walk you through a couple of things. So within your account settings, you can save certain searches, and I'll model that for you. But I also want to draw your attention to alerts. So you can sign up for alerts. So you get certain things sent to your email. And you can set these up here. So for example, if you're interested in new content from a particular journal, let's say that I'm interested in the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education, and I just want to know anytime there's a new publication, then you can sign up for those alerts. You can also sign up for alerts related to citations. So if you've published a piece or there is a piece that you are really interested in and you want to know whenever someone is citing that publication, which means that someone is in conversation with that piece, you can sign up for citation alerts. And the way you do so is simply going to the article that you're interested in, and there's a section called citations. And if you click on that, you can just say subscribe to citation updates. Okay. If you are just beginning to explore a publisher and you want to see what kinds of journals are out there that could be of interest for your work, then you can just use the general search engine here. So let's say I am interested in Asian American youth. I'm going to keep it really broad here. So when I click on it, you can see how there are over almost 60,000 articles. So that's not very helpful. So I'm going to use the filter on the left-hand side. I'm going to select for, let's say, articles. I am interested in a publication date that's more recent. So let's say 2019 to 2022. I'm going to keep language open. And in terms of modifying my search, I want to search for this phrase within the abstract at least. And let's see what that gives us. So now you can see how we've narrowed it down to 43 articles. And at this point, you can, if you're interested in saving this search, you can just click on Save the Search. You can also export the search results. And this could be a way to not only find literature for your literature review, which is often an essential part of your publication, but also gives you a sense of where these articles are published. So race, ethnicity, and education seems to be quite common here. Equity and excellence education, Journal of Child and Adolescent Counseling, right? So it gives you just a list of journals. And at this point, you can click into the journals, read a little bit more, and that can be yet another way to find a fit, a good home for your writing. Okay, there are other things you can do within publisher sites. So I just gave you a mini tour of one. Within Taylor and Francis, there is the option to also receive updates within your subject. And so this is what that page looks like. You can just type in your contact information and sort of sign up for your interests. This, I'm just showing you another publisher's site called Wiley. And within their online library, you can, again, do something very similar, go through their journals and just skim through the list. What is really nice about the Wiley library is that you can see a visual of the journals as well. There is also a function within Wiley that I really appreciate, which is this, this area called Find the Journal That's Right for Your Research. I find this to be really interesting. So you can type in your manuscript title or the tentative title, copy and paste your manuscript, and then click Find. And that's how you can get some curated recommendations for where your manuscript could find a potential home. Keep in mind that I think this is computer generated based on an algorithm, and it's really based on what information is in your abstract. I think they match the keywords there with keywords in the scope of the journal. So I think that's how it works. Sage Publishing is another publisher, and similarly, you can sign up for email alerts. This one has a couple more options. You can sign up for table of contents alerts, and this could be a really powerful way for you just to see what types of things are being published. Even just skimming the titles can be helpful for you to get a sense of what the field is and the direction in which it's moving. Announcement alerts in case there are calls for proposals, online first alerts. So often the digital version of articles are published before the print version, so you can learn when the online version gets published first. And of course, you can get search alerts as well. All right, so now let's talk about finding a home based on recommendations. So this basically means word of mouth. Ask your advisors, ask your professors, colleagues, your peers, look within your professional networks. These could be physical networks or digital networks through Twitter and Instagram, for example. What would they recommend based on what they know about your work? So this, of course, involves being maybe a little bit more vulnerable. So whereas the previous ways involve just you alone searching for a home, this one requires that you sort of open up and share a little bit of what you're working on and seeing if others might have a suggestion for you. So I have, for example, through looking at my writing communities, I've learned about some of these online Facebook groups that are geared towards qualitative research. There's one group called Qualitative Research in Education. There's another one called Innovative Social Research Methods. And both of these communities have all kinds of recommendations for places to publish. So some people actually have like curated lists. They will often share their experiences with publishing in certain with certain journals. So joining this kind of community can be another way to find a more tailored home for your writing. Dr. Bhattacharya is someone that I follow on Twitter, and she's been really generous in terms of sharing kind of the behind the scenes of academic publishing. So she has actually curated this extensive list of interdisciplinary journals that she believes are friendly to qualitative research, and you can get access to that list by signing up for it. So if you kind of just search for her or go to her Twitter page, you can kind of access this list of journals. Related to recommendation, you can also find a good fit for your writing anecdotally. So what this means is consider these questions. Think about what are some of your favorite articles that you've read? Okay, maybe it was something you read for a course, maybe it's one that you just encountered randomly. Think about going back to those articles and find out where they were published. Okay. Another way to assess whether something is a good fit for you would be to look at the work that you tend to cite, okay, and then go through that scholarship. Where are those articles published, or where are those maybe it's not a journal article, maybe it's a book. You can also think about where your peers tend to publish, assuming that these are peers in your same program. Maybe these are peers that you met in a conference and they share similar interests with you. Maybe it's a professor you've been working with. You can all consider their publications and seeing where they have published. Similarly, you can also evaluate and look into the journals that seem to have importance in the field you see yourself being a part of. What are those journals, and could they serve as a home for your work? Finally, another way to find a fit would just be to pay attention to the reference section of articles that are published. So if you're just reading something and you want it to be interesting, doing a quick skim of the reference section can give you a sense of what some of the other places are. This could be a way of finding a journal or a home that is unfamiliar to you, that houses work that is similar to yours. So this is probably like a little bit more randomly, but can be just as helpful. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. So we've talked about 6 different ways to find a home for you. And I just wanted to bring up this idea of fit as being really important in finding your home and not necessarily aiming for best. And so this is just a reminder from the GWC team that The best journal, however that's measured in your field, may not be the right fit for your research. Just know that journals have different priorities. They have a different focus. Journals will publish different kinds of work. So you think about the variety that's out there and finding a good match for your work. And keep in mind that your writing, as well as your area of research, might evolve. And so consider moving along as well when it comes to finding your home. So try to be flexible and open. And it could be helpful to keep a list of potential homes and updating it every year, adding more, moving ones, etc. It's a very dynamic process. So there are a couple of other areas to find spaces to publish your work, and these tend to be more timely, which means they're also time sensitive. So a great place to start looking as well would be through listservs. Listservs are kind of like databases that you can sort of subscribe to through email. I belong to a couple of them. So for example, I am in the curriculum and teaching doc students listserv, and through that listserv, I will often find calls for proposals. Here's just an example. Here's another example that gets shared. I'm also part of certain divisions in AERA, and that's another listserv where I can access different calls for articles, but also calls for chapters. And here I'm just giving you an example. And if you're not sure what listservs to join, you can ask professors, you can ask your peers. Newsletters are another place to find out about publication opportunities. So a newsletter that I'm signed up for is the American Educational Studies Association. And every week they send this newsletter, and there's a section called calls. And so as you can see here in red, there are calls for proposals, there are calls for papers, calls for lesson plans, so different types of calls, and these are up to date. So if you have something ready that matches, this could be a really wonderful opportunity. So these calls for proposals can be found in various institutions as well as within TC. So sometimes professors will push out calls for proposals. AERA specifically has a graduate student council that puts together a newsletter that they send out monthly. It's called the manual. And within this manual, there are calls for all kinds of writing opportunities. So I think the takeaway here is that networking is one way to find your home as well. So consider looking for opportunities through your networks. And often, not only will you meet people, but you might find places that can house your work. And of course, academic Twitter. I would also mention that there are academic communities on Instagram as well. You have to find the right hashtags. So here are a couple of common hashtags that I feel could be helpful in terms of just finding spaces and support for the publication process. So there is academic Twitter, academic chatter, academic writing or AcWrite. There's PhDgram, PhD chat, and then there are two handles that you can follow. There's Open Academics and PhD Voice. They tend to put out pretty good content that's very relevant to students who are interested in reading for publication. So we've just walked through a whole lot of stuff. I'm going to throw a couple of more considerations for you. So earlier when we were on the Scimago journal ranking site, you probably saw this little lock symbol. The ones with the lock symbol mean that the journals or the articles are gated. They are behind a paywall. So fortunately, as Teachers College students, we have access to, I would say, a huge range of journals that the institution has already paid for. The thing here to consider is that not everyone will have access to those subscriptions. So one thing to think about as you are finding a home is whether you want to make your work more widely accessible. If you do, then you might want to consider publishing in open access journals. So these are journals that anyone can access without having to pay for subscription. These journals often have other sources of funding that allow them to operate in this manner. You can also pay for open access, but that tends to be rather expensive, anywhere from a couple $100s to even thousands of dollars. So I feel like that's not very sustainable for us as students, but sometimes a professor, especially if you are co-writing a piece, they might have a grant that can be used to pay for open access. So that's something to keep in mind. Something else to think about is also to be aware of these journals called predatory journals. They are called predatory because they require you to pay a fee in order to publish. So this idea of pay for play. In general, they are a big no for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, you have to pay for it. So you're basically paying for a home. And also these predatory journals tend not to have a peer review or copy editing process. So you're not getting the feedback, you're not going through that critical read of your work before it gets published. So I think this just goes to kind of highlight the importance of a peer review process, and most journals, at least the ones that are not predatory, have a pretty rigorous peer review process. When it comes to finding a good fit for writing, besides thinking about the journal itself, you might also want to consider how timely the journal will respond to your manuscript submissions. So you might fall in love with a journal and find it to be really amazing, but their timeline is ridiculously long. So hence the meme on the right there. So that's something to think about. If you really want to get your work out there and this journal takes 2 years on average, you might want to consider a different home, especially if you're writing about is very time sensitive. Feedback is something else to consider, and this might be something that you learn about with experience or just word of mouth. Especially if you're co-authoring with a professor, your professor might have experience with a particular journal in terms of the quality of feedback. Some journals might not give you the opportunity to publish in their home, but they might give you really amazingly helpful feedback that pushes you in your thinking and in your writing. And submitting to that place just to get that feedback can also be a powerful learning experience. So that's something to consider. Past experience submitting to journals. This is something else that might inform whether you want to select a place. So when I co-authored with a professor, she kind of gave me an overview of her track record, particular journals, which ones gave her helpful feedback, which ones didn't give her helpful feedback, which ones took a long time. So I think just the more information you have about a journal, the more informed of a decision you can make about whether this is the right time and right place for you to submit. And I would say another point to consider is, now that composition and writing and publication is moving in more digital directions and more multimodal directions, you might also look for journals that allow for more opportunities for expanded, more creative and innovative pieces. So just to give you a couple of examples, I recently encountered this journal called the Digital Culture and Education Journal. It is an international journal. It's open access. It is peer reviewed. And I'm just giving you a couple of samplings from one of their special issues that just had really, really cool articles with lots of visuals and very interactive and engaging modes of communication. So know that academic writing is going through changes of its own, And so if you find yourself composing in different ways, you might want to find a home that responds to your way of writing to the world. And so since this webinar is already rather long, I'm going to wrap it up right here by giving you some homework in finding your home. This is taken directly from Dr. Felicia Menza's book, and it's an exercise to help you identify potential journals for your work and doing a little bit of work in terms of discerning the different styles of different journals. So here is basically a 7-step prompt for helping you find a potential home, and I hope that it is helpful. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this particular webinar. I hope this has been helpful. Stay tuned for more webinars. And again, I look forward to joining you for a subsequent one. Take care.